as a journalism major, you can see this is a dream interview for me to be doing, so thank you for being here, Amy. And thank you to Milsa, because I have to say, I was feeling a little tired and overwhelmed in the best of ways from this STF Summit weekend, and Milsa just gave me a whole new boost of energy. So we're ready to go and closing out this amazing summit with our audience on Facebook Live watching as well. So it's really fitting, I think, that we close on the subject of storytelling because I think we share the belief that that's one of the most powerful tools and strategies we have to change the world. Stories are what widen people's perspectives and inspire them to take action. So we've got a master here to show us how it's done. Amy, your title as Chief Story Officer and Editorial Director at Upworthy and Good. What does that mean? What are you responsible for?
Well, it's a number of things. At Upworthy and Good, we really believe that stories are one of the best tools we have to make the world a better place. And my job is to figure out how to take challenging subjects that are really important to all of us, subjects like climate change, like feminism, and how do you find stories that are not just gonna, let's say, I would imagine most of this room feels like, yeah, I'm a feminist, that's good, I would read stories about feminism. We're interested in that. But we also want to find people who don't like feminism at all, don't even really think it's important. And we try to find stories that are so powerful that they'll work their way into the hearts and minds of people who may otherwise not be interested in some of those subjects. Because we think that again, the stories are kind of our magic secret weapon at bringing people to these important topics.
And I'm going to assume that most of this audience, they're Upworthy readers, but just to illustrate in a minute what makes Upworthy different from other media out there, we have a quick video.
Here at Upworthy, we know stuff can be great stories, like this one about a dad empowering his daughter.
Raising a really strong, confident woman is super important for me, and making sure she's got great role models, but also being a great role model is a primary goal, I guess.
But do you know our story? A short while back, you might have noticed that with every new meme, viral video, and comment thread, the content dominating your feed was becoming less and less, well, meaningful. And the internet, with all its potential to connect us with the things that mattered, was actually distracting us with the stuff that didn't. Then Upworthy came along, with a theory. We knew meaningful stories were out there, and people wanted to see them. So we searched every corner of the internet, found the best stuff, and applied a bit of data, science, and intuition to help it get noticed.
I served my great country. I came home, and this is my passion. I don't want my son to look at me like I'm something less because I have to work for $7.25 when I bust my butt every day and I take pride in what I do, gentlemen.
People started sharing these meaningful stories like crazy. We knew it. Stories about important things can get tons of attention. Meaningful stories help people feel better, hopeful, and more connected to others. And that makes a difference. Like when Upworthy brought massive attention to this story, one of our viewers said it literally saved his life. Upworthy stories can open hearts and change minds. And when people share meaningful, Upworthy experiences, lots of good happens. Over time, Upworthy learned so much about how to tell great stories that we not only shared them, we started to make our own. More and more meaningful, important, well, Upworthy stories were getting the attention they deserved, helping us feel, changing perspectives, generating hope, and connecting us. And the closer we feel, the bigger difference we can make. Because when you think about it, we're all part of the same story.
We're all so glad that Upworthy exists in the world. But Amy, what does that mean to you that we're all a part of the same story? What is that story to you?
Well, I think there's a fundamental thing that we all share as human beings. And that is, we're all trying to figure out the world as it's happening around us and to us and before us. And stories are really the main way that our brains have to interpret the world. So we are all kind of trying to figure out what's going on together. And as we have new things happen and we're trying to interpret things and understand how to act, stories are really the blueprint that we all share. There's like a common human blueprint, which is this happened next. and then this happened, and then this other thing happened, and wow, look at what happened over here. That is just a fundamental human drive that we all share, and each one of you can use it to affect change. It's a pretty remarkable tool.
And we're going to talk further about how to tie this into your activism in your lives. But first, I want to start with Amy's story. And I was curious because I think a lot of us, when we're kids or when we're in school, we have influences in our lives that are predicting what will become later in life. You know, for example, for me, I got busted starting a business on the elementary school playground, which was a good indicator I'd become an entrepreneur. Yeah. So what was it for you that made this love of storytelling so innate?
I mean, first, I think I was a huge reader. I loved reading stories. I read at a pretty early age and was just always surrounded by books, and that's a wonderful thing no matter what. But a little later on, when I was probably 10, 11, 12, every single time I got an assignment in class where I had to do some project, like a research project or a paper or a poster, I would always go to the teacher, and we'd just gotten, this was in the 80s, and the technology was very bad, but we'd just gotten this very clunky video camera. And every time I got one of these assignments, I would go to my teacher and said, could I just make a video about this instead, thinking it would be fun and cool? And it was like 30 times harder. Like there was no, like you couldn't edit. You literally just had to shoot every shot in sequence, and I would be like in my bedroom with costumes and like trying to tell the story of World War II pilots and crazy things. But it was so much fun to figure out a story rather than a straight report. And I think at the core of it for me is I say this a lot as an editor, and it maybe doesn't sound very good, but I get bored really easily, like really easily. And because of that, I'm always working not to be bored. I want to be excited, and I really want to be surprised. And I think part of what I was doing when I was a kid was just trying to, like, I didn't want to write another paper the way it was assigned. I wanted to surprise myself. I wanted to surprise my classmates and my teacher. And that was always more fun to me than just doing the thing that I was given, and I think that stayed with me.
Mm-hmm. So looking at your career, when you told me that when you were in high school, you dreamed of working for NPR and the New York Times. And I think a lot of people in the audience, are working towards that dream company and dream job. But you've already been there, done that, and you are now in a part of your career that is probably bigger than you even dreamed was possible when you were in high school. So how did you make that happen? How can we all not only achieve our dreams, but go beyond them?
Yeah, I was obsessed when I was 17 years old with becoming a reporter for the New York Times. I would beg my parents to borrow the car to drive 30 minutes to the one place you could buy the New York Times where I lived near Seattle. And I honestly can't tell you why I was so obsessed with that at the time. But it was a crazy long road it took to get there. But the main lesson I want to leave you with, and then it's a long story, is that any dream job you have is totally achievable. And I know that sounds like bullshit. People say you can always achieve your dreams, but there's actually a really practical way to do it, because I've done it twice. And the first time I was about 25 years old, and my career had gone off on the wrong track. I was working at a software company in Minnesota. I wasn't doing journalism. I'm not even from Minnesota. I didn't like it there very much. And one day I was like, I was supposed to be a journalist. I had this dream when I was 17. Like, what happened to me? And I felt like I'd just gone off track. And I heard an episode of This American Life one day that was like so inspiring to me. It made me like, I was driving my car, it made me want to like hit the ceiling of the car and go, yes, that's what I want to do, I want to make that. And then I stopped and I realized that like so many people wanted to make that. 200 people at that time every year would apply just for their internship. And I was like, how am I ever going to do that? That seems really hard. But then I set up a plan. And this is where, if you're going to take notes on how to get your dream job, write down this part. So I set up a plan. I gave myself a deadline. I said 5 years. I'm going to try to get a job at This American Life in the next 5 years. And I made a promise to myself that I felt I just had to be willing to either work harder or sacrifice more than the other 200 people or 2,000 people that wanted that job. And I was willing to do that for 5 years. And I felt like, if after 5 years I fail and I don't get a job there, I will just go back to working at the software company and I will be happy in Minnesota. So I got the job in 3 years, and this is how I did it. I first researched everybody who worked at that show. I researched every single person who had a job there. There were about 8 of them at the time and a few alumni. I found about 10% of them were interns at the show. So then I researched every single intern I could find from the show's credits. I listened to the credits and I wrote down their names because it was the only way to figure out the names of the interns. I researched all the interns. About 10% of them had gone to this radio documentary semester program called SALT in Maine. So I started calling them and I said, hey, should I go to this program SALT? Mostly because I just wanted to meet these interns and ask them how they got the internship. That worked. One of the former interns was a producer, this woman, Diane Cook, took my phone call. Call people. Write this in here. Call the people who have your dream job. Email them. Be really nice. Make them laugh. Tell a joke in your email. Like, don't just ask them for favors. Like, give them a little smile. And you can talk to the people who have your dream job. And you can ask them, how did you get there? Now, one of the things that school doesn't help us very much with, I think, in life, is that school and our teachers generally tell us, if you want to be successful, I'm going to give you the instructions. And you just have to follow the instructions, get an A, and everything's going to be great. Well, as I'm sure most of you know, life isn't that simple. There isn't a set of instructions for your lives. You have to make that plan yourself. So the reason I say you've got to research the people who have your dream job and call them is because these are the people who have the instructions for how you're going to get your dream job. These are the people that you're going to call up, and you might see if you can, if they're in the same city, maybe take them out for a coffee, maybe have a phone chat, an email interview. You want to ask them how they got there, what they did, what were the important turning points for them to get into that. You want to ask them what they learned, and you want to just become a student of your heroes. You want to almost diagram out how they did it, and that becomes your roadmap. Now, I'm sure all of you are good students. Once you have the roadmap, just like in a class where then you work hard to get the A, you just follow the roadmap. And that's what I did at This American Life. I did all the things that I learned from talking to people who worked there. I worked really hard on my applications. I did some unconventional things. I hired a comic book illustrator to draw a comic strip about what a great intern I would be, because I knew the show liked comic books. I did some research and found the secret office they had in Brooklyn, and I knocked on the door of the office like out of the blue one day, and I offered to work for free. They were like really didn't know what to do with me. They were kind of nervous and embarrassed because I just showed up to this little secret office, and they were about to shoo me away, and then they stopped and said, actually, could you transcribe some tape? We just got about 30 hours of tape from Brazil. Could you help us with that? That made all the difference. So the lesson that I want to give you about going after a dream job is that it's not, it doesn't work like school. You don't just send in an application and hope and wait. You don't just fill in the boxes like a teacher might tell you. You have to engineer your own plan. And you can do that by studying the people who've gotten there before you, by talking to them directly, and making your own plan. Now, the last two pieces I want to mention with this is, and I said this at the beginning, was it's really critical, for me, it was really critical to set up that deadline, that 5 years, and to say that I personally knew what I was willing to sacrifice. In those 5 years, I moved 12 times, or those 3 years that it took me to get the job, I moved 12 times. I sold my car. I went into about $15,000 of debt. I quit a well-paying job and was unemployed for a big stretch of that time. And those were all risks that I took. But I was okay with that because I gave myself that 5-year deadline. I knew even if I never got the job, I would feel like I'd done my best and that I was willing to give up those things for 5 years to see if I could do it. And it worked out crazily. I can't believe it worked out.
Wow, so well said. I'm glad that this is going to be on video so you can watch it again and share it with your friends, because this is like the secrets to success that are so tangible and really apply the skills of investigative journalism in a sense to your everyday life.
Yeah.
And I love what you said too about not underestimating the power that the interns and the entry-level staff of a company has, because they know how to get in. So on that note, just looking at your Twitter bio, it struck me that you still include your roots of being a small-town newspaper reporter, and with many in the audience being in that first internship or first job, and speaking to what you already brought up about it's those unglamorous moments that actually, in retrospect, you see served you so well. So what did you learn as a small town reporter that is something that you apply now working in some of the biggest media companies in the world?
That's a great question. So I believe that you are bigger than your job, and that's a really important thing to remember, that your story and who you are in your career is much bigger than whatever job title you're holding at the time or even the job you're trying to get next. So it's important for you. I'm going to tell you a story about how I quit that first job in protest angrily after throwing my glasses across the room. It's really important to know who you are and what your values are. And that whatever job you have, I mean, our current economy, jobs change all the time. You're not going to work for the same company forever. We all know that. And it's really important to have kind of this idea of yourself that is always constant, even as you're learning and changing, and maybe even if you're not sure what you want to ultimately do. So, flashback, I am now 20 years old. This was before This American Life. This was about 5 years earlier, before the software company. I still wanted to work at the New York Times. The advice at that time was to go to a small paper in the Midwest and work your way up. So I'm at a small paper in the Midwest. I'm covering local government. I'm going to feedlot zoning meetings and city council meetings, and it's super boring. But that's like what you did. That's how you started out. In the town that this was in Northfield, Minnesota, where Carleton and St. Olaf colleges are, there was a big Target store wanted to have a new development. It was right next door to this car dealership. Car dealers spend a lot of money in newspaper advertising, so they think often that they can have some influence. I believe for myself, as a young reporter, I believe strongly in journalism and the ethics of journalism, and very soon after I started covering this development issue, the car dealer was calling up my bosses at the paper asking for changes to my articles. He wanted that development in the town because he wanted all that traffic right by his car dealership. And some of my articles were critical about that development. And he didn't like to see that in the paper, so he was calling up. And at one point, my bosses would fax, because it was, 1998, fax my articles to his car dealership. He would line edit them and send them back. This is a complete breach of journalistic ethic. It's completely wrong. A friend of mine in the advertising department found one of these faxes and brought it over to me. I'm 20 years old. I was making $18,500 a year at my little reporter job. I didn't have a backup plan. I didn't know what I was going to do. And I first went to my boss and I said, this is unacceptable. This can't happen. I can't work in a newspaper that's like this. Either you guys change or I have to leave. And they said, okay, yeah, sure, we'll change. Like 3 weeks went by, they did it again. And I literally came into the newspaper one morning and I picked up the article that I had turned in that night, and I see it on the front page and it's totally different. And there are all these crazy changes. And I threw my glasses across the room and I went over and I was like, I cannot work here anymore. And I just quit.
So you learned how to like stand for your values.
Yeah, and there's actually a moral of the story, which isn't just to stand up for your values. That's important. But I have told this story to absolutely everyone I've ever gotten a job from. This story has become part of who I am. And when we talk about storytelling and we talk about how you achieve your dreams, I'm a big believer that you need to have a story of who you are. And that these moments and things that can happen to you in a really early job or internship that can define you can become part of your story forever. And that's not to put pressure on what you're doing, but just to say that, like, again, you're bigger than any one job. Your story is bigger than whether or not you had an internship or, an entry-level job here or there. Your story is about how you conducted yourself in that job, what you discovered when you were doing that. And it doesn't matter where you start, you can take lessons from that then inform whatever you do and become part of who you are in your own storytelling.
So now we'll start to transition over to how to use storytelling for activism. And I wanted to also draw on another part of your background, which was when you were at the New York Times, and Amy worked with the team on the New York Times Innovation Report. How many people were on that team?
About 6.
6 people were on the team, and they were tasked with creating a report of how the New York Times could keep up with the evolution of social media and everything that was happening online to stay with the times. And I remember when this report leaked out on social media, and Kristen shared it with me, and it was so exciting to us because we're journalism majors and like digital media geeks, but I think everyone took interest in it.
A million people have downloaded it.
That's incredible.
It was leaked. We were very embarrassed. It's fine though.
But
It's
it ended
good.
up,
It's good.
It ended up all good. I think that there are lessons in your experience for those of us who are trying to change our industries or our companies to be more innovative, but also more purposeful. I think there are a lot of people in the audience who want their companies to be doing more to support She's the First and other causes. So what can they learn from your experience in trying to push innovation in a very old, legendary company?
Yeah. So this is interesting. We live in this moment of incredible change. The technological change that is moving our society is happening at a crazy fast rate, and it's only going to speed up in our lifetimes. So all of us, in all of the jobs we ever have from here to, whenever we retire, we're going to be doing what's called change management. You have to deal with change. And what can be particularly challenging is especially if you're a young woman in a big legacy company and you've got people who've been there for 20, 30 years, and you know that it has to change, but maybe they don't know that it has to change, or they don't want to change. And that's a common issue. So this happened at the New York Times. The Innovation Report was one piece of how we got there, but a lot of my work actually at the newspaper was about this problem. I really believe passionately in news and journalism. I really believe strongly that the New York Times should have a huge, thriving audience, because what it does is so important. But I would look at some of the analytics and the data from the website, and not all the stories were getting read as much as they should. Some of them weren't getting read much at all. And they were in the paper, they were getting read there. But this was a problem I wanted to fix. And so how do you go to someone who's been a prize-winning foreign correspondent? They have 2 Pulitzer Prizes. They're really scary. They're really smart. They don't know who you are. They don't necessarily care. And you're working with them, and you need to tell them they have to start doing things differently, right? How do you do that? So I would go back to, again, one of the key skills I talked about in how to get your dream job. That's research. So what I would do is if I had a meeting with somebody, I would start reading almost everything they'd written. When I had my first meeting with the top editor now at the New York Times, Dean Baquet, I printed out every article he'd ever written that was over 1,000 words, and I read them all on a flight. And so then I knew a lot about his career and background. And when I talked to him that first time, I could drop a few things that showed that I really knew him and his career. And everyone that I've done this with, they relax and they open up immediately. Because what people are afraid of when you're talking to them about change is that they're afraid that they're not going to be valued anymore. They're afraid that all the hard work and sweat and blood they poured into their career isn't going to matter anymore, and they're going to become obsolete. So if you're talking to somebody who maybe is very powerful and very accomplished, but who has that fear, the biggest way you can break through to them to get them to open up and be warm and receptive is to kind of flatter them, essentially, and not insincerely, but to say, I see you. I value everything you did in the last 30 years, and I'm, and not I was never ass-kissy about it, but it was just recognizing the real work that people do and seeing them and saying, yeah, well, that story you did in Chicago 25 years ago, absolutely. And then they're like, wow, you know about that story in Chicago. People take you a lot more seriously when you show that you've taken them seriously. And so that really helps, I think.
Yes. So now, Upworthy. Empathy is the big key word that comes across in the video we just saw. Lucia Nell spoke yesterday, and that was in her presentation. Can you talk about that filter you have when publishing stories on Upworthy so that even with the hard realities of our world, you can get people to pay attention?
Yeah, I think it's hard, right? We, as human beings, are seeing more stories today than any generation in any previous history. It's crazy the number of stories that run across our phones and our lives. And so the competition for our attention is really, really high. And a lot of people think change comes when you just give people the right facts and information, right? If we just, fact check everything and tell people, well, this is true, everyone is a rational individual and they'll all change their minds and good will happen. That is completely not true. We've seen that with the rise of fake news. We've seen it with the way that people filter out data they just don't agree with. There have been cognitive studies that show people just simply don't track information that does not already fit their worldview. This is where empathy is like a super secret magic key, right? If I can get you to care about somebody before I tell you what their politics are or exactly maybe what policy issue is embedded in their story, if I can get you to walk a little bit in their shoes and see how they see things, you're going to be a lot more open to understanding an issue that might touch that person's life than you would if I just told you, hey, there's this policy issue, it's really important, it affects 33% of young women, right? And one of the things that we've seen, we had this year, Upworthy published its most viral video ever. Over, I think, 80 million people have watched it, more than the population of France. It's a story about this guy, Rob Shear. And Rob is a really interesting guy. And now, if I were to tell you why we did that story, it would be this. So Rob Shear runs a nonprofit called Comfort Cases that makes backpacks for foster kids who are in transition so that they have like a nice set of things and a great backpack to take with them so that their belongings aren't put in a garbage bag, which happened to Rob when he was in foster care. That's sort of the topic of the story. But this is a 5-minute story that Upworthy published, and you don't learn about that until the 4th minute, so almost 80% of the way through. It starts out with Rob saying that he was one of 10 children, and they were raised in a horribly abusive family, and at one point the father pulled out a gun and said, okay, which one of you is next? And you're just in the first 15 seconds, you are on the edge of your seat feeling for this man when he was a little boy and his siblings and the terror they must have felt at the hands of this abusive parent. And then you hear how Rob moved and made something of himself and how he was moved from foster home to foster home and had to put his belongings in this trash bag, and how awful that felt, that he was, his things and himself, it was like equivalent to garbage. And later, he built a life, he joined the Marines, he married his partner, they adopted 3 kids, one of which had fetal alcohol syndrome, and they moved to a farm because their son with fetal alcohol syndrome responds much better when he's around animals, and there's some wonderful scenes in this video. But if we care about Rob and we learn about his story and that moment where he's feeling like garbage, he's a little boy and he feels like garbage, that does a lot more to open people's hearts and minds than if I tell you about the really great nonprofit Comfort Cases and the excellent work that they do.
That makes a lot of sense. So this will be my last question because you've all had such good questions today. I want to give you plenty of time to ask your own. But Amy, so pick up your pens again. This, I think, will be another good one to write down. For us all to walk away telling our stories and like the elevator pitch version of our story when we meet someone at the next conference that we go to. Yeah. How can we do that most effectively so that we drive our own success and also drive forward the movements that we believe in?
Yep. I think it's really important to have kind of 2 versions of your own story. Now again, this is different than what your job title is or what you're pursuing necessarily. One version is a short version. I'll tell you mine. I've got this really short 2-sentence thing that I explain myself with, which is I am really interested in how we get and keep people's attention on the most important stories in the world. So with that sentence, I can explain anything I've done in my career, even the weird 4 years I spent at a software startup in Minnesota. Everything I do, I can connect, if it's true or not, I can connect it to that sentence, and I can craft a story around my passion and my interests that really is, it's the best way to talk about myself, whether it's in a job interview or a press interview, or if I'm just meeting someone and they want to understand who I am. And it took me a while to figure out what that sentence is, but one thing I would encourage all of you to do is think a little bit about what is your sentence. Usually the sentence that can describe you will not be about the thing you're doing today. It could be about a question that you're going to spend your life answering. It could be around an idea you are passionately fighting for in lots of different ways. It could be around a role model that you hope to emulate. But I think it's really important that as we're building our careers and our identities, that we try to craft a sentence like that we can carry with us, to help people understand who we are and what we're going to be most invested in. The second version is a little longer story, when you have a chance to tell a little bit more about who you are. Often where people go a little bit wrong on this is they try to offer some version of their resume. And this is where you want to throw that out the window. And you know, the story I told you about throwing my glasses across the room, that's an important detail for a couple reasons. I include that because it shows you that I'm not perfect. I lose my temper. I feel passionately. I wear glasses. I think I broke those glasses. But it's also a visual detail. So you can imagine a small newspaper newsroom. You can imagine me throwing the glasses across. When we tell stories about ourselves, we want to really, I encourage you to practice the story part. Who are the characters? Are there details? Are there scenes where you can use dialogue that goes back and forth? When we're telling our own story, and this is actually probably the biggest lesson of all, if you're able to get real with people, like the glasses thing, admitting to you guys that I threw my glasses across the room, which probably wasn't very professional, that kind of vulnerability in offering a detail that maybe isn't necessary, maybe isn't flattering, but is really important to the story, is huge. Those kinds of details help people, it builds your credibility, because people believe you. Like, otherwise, why would you be telling details that aren't 100% flattering? But people also trust you, when you're a little more honest and not like in an oversharey, cringy, like everything you do, you post to social media way, but like here's a key detail I'm going to share with you to share something about who I am that's not just a resume bullet point. That's really helpful. So I would encourage your short story, practice that, work on a sentence, and then in a longer story, make sure you've got details and some pieces that express a little bit of vulnerability about who you are.
That's great advice. And if you want to tweet your short story to us, I'm sure we would love to see it and get to know you better. All right, so we'll take some questions now from the audience.
Also, while we're waiting, can I just say you guys are amazing. And another note of vulnerability, the last 2 nights I have a baby, I got 3 hours of sleep each night, and I was dying on my way here thinking I'm going to need a ton of coffee, but your energy is like better than any like red eye espresso drink. It's so cool to be in this room. You guys are amazing. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Amy. I really enjoyed hearing you talk about stories and the craft of storytelling. I have a question about your tricks that you do to kind of allow people to share their stories and how you can create a space and an environment that people feel comfortable sharing their stories. And is there any trick in interviewing or things like that that can get people to feel more comfortable and feel comfortable opening up and sharing their story? Absolutely.
So if I come into a school and I say, I'm a reporter from the New York Times, like the kids are going to clam up and like not say anything. It's really intimidating. If you want people to share their stories, one, you have to show genuine interest. And I have a little bit of a posture that I do. This is going to look weird. I'm going to do it to you. Mm-hmm. So if I'm really interviewing, if we're just talking or chit-chatting, I'll be like this. But if I'm interviewing you and I really want to show you that I'm deeply interested, I'm going to be right here. I'm going to be looking at your eyes. I'm going to make a lot of eye contact, and I'm going to be like nodding and responding really well. I'm not going to be saying much. Sometimes I'm not going to ask a question. I'm just going to let the silence happen so that she'll fill it. I also will, early on, if you are interviewing someone or trying to draw them out, they're looking to you for the tone. Like, how formal is this? How should I be? The subject doesn't really know how they should act with you. Most people aren't interviewed every day. It's unnatural. So you're like the host of the party. They're going to mirror you. So if I'm stiff and formal and I have my notes out and I'm like, well, question number 2, you're going to respond that way. If I get relaxed, or if I sit on the floor, if I take my shoe off, or if I say, fuck, the traffic was fucking difficult to get here, like, that's going to change the tone of the interview. And so everything that I do at the very beginning of an interview is pretty strategic to make that person feel comfortable and to get them in the zone where they're going to be able to share more. But the other main trick is, again, I go back to research for almost everything. do a ton of research, but then you have to act like you did none of it. And then, like, so you might know everything about me because you did a ton of preparation, but like, you know, you want to act like all the answers are super surprising if maybe you read some of my anecdotes
These tricks work
before.
for fundraising too, by the way.
Yeah.
Thanks. All right. Hi, Amy. Thank you for speaking. My name is Stephanie, and I had a question. You said Upworthy evokes a lot of emotions. That's one of your main missions with Upworthy. However, in journalism, we always want to stay objective as possible. So where do you find the balance of having people feel a certain way while remaining true to the story?
Well, so yeah, it's a great question. So in traditional journalism, you don't put a lot of emotion. You can show emotion through reporting, but you don't like put your own emotions into like the headline and story. Upworthy was created as a radical, different, almost anti-journalistic experiment. We adhere to traditional journalistic practices and values when we do our interviews and sourcing and fact-checking. We have a full-time team of standards editors and fact-checkers. We make sure everything is true and accurate. And but that said, we believe that part of what we're trying to do at Upworthy is there are people who've just completely turned off the news. It bums them out, it depresses them, and they never look at the news. Those are some of the people we're trying to reach. And we do it through emotional engagement. So if you are, you know, scrolling through your feed and you just see story, 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 a lot of people sail by that. But we'll say, this story will make you feel X. It'll make you feel excited or angry or interested. That can work to bring people back to reading things when they might have otherwise turned it off. So that's a big part of our mission, and we're trying to operate a little bit outside the traditional journalistic orbit as an experiment to do that.
Hi, my name is Terry Kristen. I'm actually an admissions counselor for the University of Rochester. So talking about stories, I read a lot of them. I learned about a lot of good stories.
I bet you do. Wow.
I was very curious as to specifically for the population of like high school students or even younger and grammar school kids, how to get them to realize that they have a story even though they don't feel like they have enough content in their lives to have a worthwhile one. And also, is it different? Like, how would you advise a kid to tell their story both orally versus written? So like in my context, possibly through essays versus in the interview. And how will you get a kid to feel comfortable in this sort of like, I guess, professional sense, but like have them feel relaxed as you was just describing?
Okay, those are a couple questions, but I'll give you one answer that might help with most of those. So there's a thing we talk about in journalism a little bit. We're going to have to call it something different for kids, but it's like the bar test, right? So if you're working on a story and you're stuck, one classic technique that we use is you say, okay, how would you tell this to your friend at a bar over a beer, right? So maybe we're talking about over a marshmallow or over a cup of cocoa or something. But like the idea is that a lot of, and this is one of the challenges with school, right? School teaches us formal essay writing and like thesis statements, and like that's terrible for storytelling. It's actually really, really bad. You don't want to give the point of your story away at the top and then give 8 reasons why you just told your story, right? It's the opposite. So like everything we learn in school kind of teaches us to become, I hate to say this, really boring writers. And to deprogram that, but here's the beautiful thing. As human beings, we all have this natural antenna where we all kind of intrinsically understand if people are interested or bored. We can read it on their faces. So when you get in person with somebody, and maybe you pair kids up like this, and you have them tell each other a story, and then you use the audience member as the person to say, well, this was the interesting part. This was the part I liked. This part I was bored by. Or you could have the storyteller of the pair kind of take notes on when their friend got bored or engaged. The best writers, David Sedaris, who does a lot at This American Life, he does that with live audiences. He'll try out a story. He'll do a big auditorium. He'll fill it up. He'll tell a bunch of stories he's told before. And then at the end, he'll pull out a new story. And he'll take notes on when you laugh. And if you're not laughing, he'll cut parts. That's actually the best editing I can describe. And so part of what you want to do is you want to get kids really comfortable to kind of free write and just throw a lot out there, but then use the editing process of paying attention to when people are engaged or bored to then figure out what parts of the story are great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
All right, last question.
Hi, my name is Catherine Morris. I'm here with the Daniel Trust Foundation, also a student. With our foundation, we work with the career and educational needs for students in our community. And I feel like a lot of our work has to do with being able to spread the stories of each student and teacher to kind of advocate for them, as well as providing them with their essentials that they need. And right now, I'm kind of interested in, this can be for both of you guys, how we go about gaining more traction via social media, et cetera, to have a broader, be able to basically spread the stories of all of our students even more so, to like gain more attraction to the foundation and basically expand.
Do you want to?
You can take it first.
Okay. Well, I think, first of all, a lot of, there's this idea that a lot of beginning journalists have, or people doing storytelling have, that like I'm going to sound like a horrible person in a second, so hang on, that everybody has a story to tell, right? And everybody's got a great story in them. Yes and no. Not exactly true. So everybody's important. Everybody's lives are really important, and everybody has a narrative about their own life that's important. But when you are doing communications, especially for a specific purpose, some stories, some people's stories are going to resonate more, and not everybody is good at telling their own story, or even coughing up the details so that you can help them tell it. So I think first you don't want to say, we're going to take every student in this program and every teacher. You want to really cast, and it's almost like a casting process where you're looking for the very best of the stories you have among this group of people. So maybe you do interviews with everybody, but then you're taking the top 3 or 5, and those are the stories you're really crafting, right? You want to really select the things that are bringing the most attention. And then I think you want to, one of the main things that people miss in especially advocacy type storytelling is they get to the point way too quickly. They're so eager to promote the foundation or the nonprofit or the cause that gets in the way of the story. And so like the example I mentioned with the guy Rob, you didn't hear about his nonprofit until 80% of the way in the story. And it was much more effective at reaching a lot of people and getting a lot of donations for his nonprofit than if we'd just done a straight profile of the nonprofit. So keep that in mind, that most advocacy communications, I think, are undermined by too much of an urge to sort of, talk about the mission or the nonprofit or what is being advocated for, than the story of the human. Like, want the story of the human front and center for a really long time, and then if that moves people, then connect them to the larger cause.
Exactly, and don't underestimate the power of your own social media pages. It doesn't necessarily have to be on the foundation or the organization's page. I find the greatest traction comes from the stories that I've shared on my own Facebook page or that I've seen other people share on theirs versus the ones that live on She's the First. Because no one cares more about you than your own friends and family. And if they see that you're passionate about She's the First or something else, then it's just going to be contagious. And there's no limit to what that could achieve. Because we wouldn't all be here today if it wasn't for social media, and the original Facebook post and YouTube video that launched She's the First into what all of this has become and what you've all been a part of today. So I can't think of a more fitting ending to it all than this, Amy. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you guys. It's been awesome. Thank you.